Welcome to Mind and Heart. I'm Sister John Dominic, a foundress of the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist. It has been my joy to have been involved in Catholic education for over 30 years. One of my privileges for the community has been to create Lumen Ecclesiae Press, a publishing organization that develops educational resources used now by over 500 schools around the United States and the world. Lumen Ecclesiae is our call to magnanimity, our call to be large-souled, to do something greater for the Church. So today, I invite anyone interested in becoming a saint to join with us as we unpack the deep beauty, mystery, and certainties of our faith to transform our lives so that we can know, love, and serve God with our mind and heart. Welcome to Mind and Heart. And I'd like to welcome back my guest, Dr. Karen Villa.
Thank you for having me.
I know we're going to continue our unpacking the understanding of interpersonal neurobiology.
That's right.
In our first episode, if those of you may have missed it, you may want to go back. And as we talked about the structure of the brain, mind, and we gave also some definitions of what neuroplasticity is, interpersonal neurobiology. We talked about the decade of the brain. Mm-hmm. The second episode, we unpacked, really, we began to see the beautiful connection between living the virtuous life and brain development.
Right.
And the yes brain and the no brain. And I encourage you again to look at that so you can really get the full impact of what we're trying to unpack here and this exciting discovery, really, that we've seen in the decade of the brain, even though we're that started in the early 1980s, correct?
And was funded mostly in the 1990s, and now is just being integrated into, what we know about development, learning, and mental health.
And so we're just now really starting to unpack it. And for me, with the development of Disciple of Christ Education and Virtue, just seeing this coming together, it's exciting because we really, again, see the wonderful of God's, really His love for us and His desire for us to be whole.
That's right.
And to experience wholeness. And in this episode, we really want to look at integration and the understanding of what is the river of integration and what does it mean on the opposite side of that, and really to look at strategies and really to give tips to educators, to parents, to how we can implement this and understand this a little bit more fully. So why don't we start with integration and what that means?
So, integration really is a sign of a healthy mind. And integration is that yes brain, where a child is curious and creative and, joyfully engaged with their environment, willing to try new things, and resilient to handle mistakes and challenges. So there's this good information flow, like in a river, information flow in and out of the brain. So that's the river of integration. What we find when a child isn't integrated, that they can be on one of these two banks. One is rigidity, where they're unwilling and kind of stuck and stubborn, unwilling to try new things, for instance. And the other side is chaos, where there's restlessness, there's anxiety, and disorganization. So we really see the river of integration as that flow of information.
So where you want them to kind of get in that, I guess when you think of a river flowing, it's harmonious, it's just going, and it's not like you can just, and I think the understanding to go from the chaos or from the rigidity, that would be a process that you'd have to do, but there have to be certain tools or different things that they've discovered that would help them along in that process.
Right, to especially have that balance that we talked about in the last episode, where a child has this ability to know that they can use their mind to regulate their emotions and their body and their decision making. Yeah. And that is an evolving process, but it's very much fostered by this environment that is a virtuous environment that is safe and non-threatening and respects that emotion does need to be regulated. So we don't want to flood kids with a lot of our own emotion. We want to help them to regulate theirs.
Yeah, and when you said that too about even just in parenting, I mean, so oftentimes, I mean, I can remember, and maybe it's the age in which we were raised, but if there was really difficult or hardships that the parents experienced, sometimes you would sense that they had a difficulty, but they would keep those conversations private.
And that's right.
And it didn't, and so they would, these are things that the adults would worry about, and that you as a child, you had a little bit more of a freedom, even though you'd see that. So sometimes I think we don't want to introduce adult things too soon, to them, and that they can't handle,
And that's intentional parenting. And this skill that we want as parents to understand our own subjective experience and whether sharing that is helping or hurting our child. And it really could be either one. But a mindful parent who has good subjectivity will be able to make good decisions about that.
And decide what's appropriate to share and not.
Right.
So sometimes when we're trying to understand, to see something clear, it's good to see the opposite of it. So we did that when we defined the virtues. We gave a definition of it, and then we would show the opposing trait.
Right.
Especially if we wanted to help schools use this as their discipline, or trying to, or help parents to recognize. So if you see, because we're our own worst critics, and we always kind of look for the negative sometimes. So, but the beautiful thing about living the virtuous life, and even what we're talking about developing the yes brain, is that you look at the negative that may be there, but we have a path towards a positive.
Right.
We have a path towards a yes. We have a path towards a virtuous life. So in your experience, what are some of the challenges or the things that you see in the culture that you're experiencing with young people that you may be seeing? I could talk about the impact I've seen in schools, but maybe you could share some of what you're seeing that we need to move them, that's preventing them from being integrated.
Yeah, so I think like you alluded to earlier, children are getting much more isolated and disconnected from one another, even though they have this device to stay connected, right, supposedly. Yeah. But it's deceptive because it's not authentic and true connection. And social media itself tends to cause quite a bit of anxiety in young people who are feeling like my worth comes from how people are responding to me on social media. And they aren't developing that sense of worth from turning inward and getting to know themselves and having real relationship and real connection. So one of the reasons why social media is it serves a purpose, to be sure, but one of the reasons it's not helpful is because you lose what we call contingent communication, like what we're doing, where we are talking back and forth, we're listening to one another, we're responding to what each other is saying, we're tuned into nonverbal cues. All of that is missing with this these short snippets of contact that, end up not being very meaningful. And so what happens is that kids are much more anxious and depressed than we have ever seen them. And, because of this biological determinism and just looking at the brain, we tend to treat them with medication rather than through relationship and understanding and trying to help them balance vice and virtue, trying to achieve this integration between desire, which comes from our downstairs brain, and conscience, which comes from our upstairs brain, and really is about developing these frontal lobe functions that support a healthy integration of conscience and desire.
So would you say one of the things, too, I experience this sometimes is that in this time in our culture where we have instant gratification, like you said, we could find things, is that are people patient enough, because like you said, is that sometimes we may have this tendency to treat with medication, but are we patient enough to not allow them to have maybe that screen time during the academic week? Are we patient enough to set those boundaries for them? And are we patient enough to deal with the temper tantrums when they're not doing what everybody else is doing? That it is easier that you may think, well, medication may solve it, but that really should be like the last thing. So I don't know if that's one thing you've seen. Is it how? I mean, what is the timeline? Sometimes it could. Sometimes could it be a year? Is it 6 months? I mean, to
be on medication.
Well, even what we talked about, like if we create these new pathways, which would be if we can start doing things like with things that are cognitive or helping them to think differently, how long does that process take?
Well, the frontal lobe, which is responsible for these executive functions, for planning, for attention and focus, for goal-directed behavior, and really for morality, how we filter our desires through our conscience, develops entirely outside of the womb.
Okay.
So the frontal lobes are developing entirely in the context of experience, relationship, and
because it's the architect of the mind.
Yes, right.
You got
that. And we're finding that the frontal lobes aren't fully developed until the mid-20s.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Is that more recent, or is that we just kind of know scientifically, or is that always how it's
That's one of the findings that came out of the decade of the brain, that it isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. So you can think of all of childhood and launching into young adulthood as like this critical period where you really want to consider what a child's environmental experiences are, what the relationships are, how you're teaching them to regulate emotion and balance desire and conscience.
So you really are intentional, I guess maybe the way I was thinking about it is that if you're bringing somebody from this situation of chaos or the opposite side of rigidity, I guess maybe it would depend on what their experience is, what's keeping them preventing, you have to find out there has to be an impediment, and we talked about the social media. We talked about.
But you see kids throughout their development from 0 to 25, have these moments of chaos and rigidity. And it's really how we navigate these using some of these tools, using the language and the tools from the Virtue program, how we respond to these moments of rigidity and chaos, because they're bound to happen in childhood. They don't have fully formed frontal lobes. That said, that all of childhood is a critical period, but there are certain times where it's really crucial to be able to be intentional with regard to emotional and social development. 0 to 5 we find is really important. Then, around 7, kids reach the age of reason and things are kind of quiet. But then when they get into those middle school years, which I think really start 4th and 5th grade, as with the relational aggression that we've dealt with, they're moving into another period of upheaval and chaos. And we have to get really intentional again during those times. And transitioning into high school. And then the next kind of chaotic time, I think, is when a young person is launching into young adulthood and they're separating from their families. And we see, that chaos and rigidity can show up again. And, we use these tools to respond to it. And they're certainly less intrusive than turning to medication. But sometimes if there's a really severe issue, we need to be willing to consider the support of medication.
Right, because what that does is it kind of calms the mind down a little bit.
It does, enough that you can keep this information flow and this river of integration operating relatively well.
So, and I think really one thing I find exciting about and understanding all of this is that sometimes there would be like a stigma or something, like, oh, someone needs counseling or they need therapy or you need, we all need it. You know what I mean? Like going to confession is like therapy, writing in a journal is therapy, talking to somebody. We all need it,
this time to get reflective, right?
Yeah. And it's helping. And really what we're doing is we're helping our mind. Some of this could be genetic, some of it could be hereditary. Those are all things that could be on further episodes, that we could talk about. But I think that it's just so important that if we can begin to understand the science, understand the strategies, understand ways that you can begin to create and develop healthy patterns that you can
that you won't see a child's struggles as kind of a fixed entity that just requires medical intervention. You see it as an evolving process, and that you as a parent or an educator have a way to enter into that in a relational and emotional way that actually helps to tame whatever that struggle is. So, another one of our interpersonal neurobiologists was this fellow named Dr. Stanley Greenspan, and he was on the East Coast while Dan Siegel was on the West Coast. But he really understood that this getting down on the floor with young children and relating to them and communicating with them really impacted any problem that they could have, whether that was attention and concentration problems or autism, that whatever that problem was, it could be made less severe by using a lot of these techniques that are about tending to relationship and emotion.
And building that relationship. And I think even like there's a word that, attunement, that I think is so important because when we go back even talking about the dignity of a child, that how our body language, how we're speaking to them, how we're looking at them. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And
so that's really mindsight, right? When we understand ourselves and we can take the perspective of another person, we can be tuned into them. And social media and so many forces in the culture, the breakdown of the family, working parents, all these distractions, this immediate gratification prevents us from being in these connected, tuned-in relationships where you really feel, a child feels really known by their parent and they feel really known by their teachers at school. And the Virtue Program, because of the structure it creates and the language it creates and these time-in approaches that it uses, really helps the environment to be tuned into the inner world of that child.
And I think, too, and I explained this also to different educators and parents alike and teachers, that when you have this language that you can say, and you can look at the child and say, you're so courteous, or, you're so affable, or... that was really foresight. You're really thinking ahead, or
so
your honesty that you have. And because this language, it naturally affirms them. It isn't like a little moment of praise, but you're recognizing, something in
really
that child.
Knowing them.
And they're like, oh, you've seen this. And there's nothing that what I want to do is, I encourage them to use that language when they're talking to the parents, because you would know as a parent when an educator or someone else sees something in your child, that's delightful.
Yes, it is. That's what every parent wants to know, that who I'm, turning my child to over during the day is actually seeing them and knowing them and cares about them.
And that there's a person,
right.
And that you see beyond.
A child internalizes that, and then they can be caring and concerned about others. So it's just... this beautiful harmony again, when that's what the environment is like.
And when I want to talk a little bit about what we talked about before we moved to the time in section, one more thing about with empathy, because I think that's, so with mindsight, we talked about the mindsight, then I want to talk a little bit about time in. Is there anything else with mindsight or something that...
Well, I would go back to the Virtue Program where you have this language. When you have words to talk about vice and virtue, you are really moving it into the upstairs brain, into the conscious cortical mind. It's not this, primitive behavioral or bodily expression. It's in a totally different part of the mind when you put language to it. And it's in the part of the mind that can benefit from these frontal lobe abilities, where somebody can be planful, reflective, thoughtful, and moral about whatever their struggle is.
So I didn't think about with when you talk about even with morality or living that out or foresight, planning, the executive skills, which are so important, is so much a part of the mindset. And then when we talk about time in, for those that are watching, maybe you could talk about that. Then I can relate that to what we've developed in education and virtue.
So when you listen to Dr. Siegel talk about this interpersonal neurobiology and education, he says we not only need to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we need to add in these other 3 R's, which are about reflection, relationship, and resilience. So the time in piece is the reflection part, where children are taking time in their day just to step back and to be still, to be tuned in to whatever their internal bodily or mind state is, and to contemplate, have a contemplative practice around, whatever they're experiencing. And we find that this kind of emotional intelligence, which I think is what it grows, has a strong relationship to cognition and how well thinking and cognition works. And so in the Virtue program, you have the Lectio Divina, which is a process for children to step back and, calm their minds and be reflective, come into relationship with their inner world and map that, come into relationship with Christ and map that, and then go into their learning, which goes so much better.
It gives it,
when they're coming from that still, attentive place.
And I think that if we don't, there's so much busyness and so much time going on.
That's true.
And just to take, if you could take that, 15, 20 minutes a day in a school setting and just provide that opportunity for them to read the Word of God. I mean, because when you read, this is why I'm so, you got me going on this. I'm so passionate about it. But well, we know when we read the Word of God that the Holy Spirit is present. So it's that relationship, and that God who's created our minds has a way in which he brings us into this relationship, and it does naturally calm them. And I've had so many examples of young people where they've written down what their experience has been when they've used that like Life of Christ journal, or they've used it during Advent, or they just had those moments of reflection, that they feel calmer.
That's right.
They feel less anxiety.
They're more in the river of integration.
Exactly. Yes. We're putting them, so if, we want to toss them into it, you can do that during the school day,
Right.
And it's important that, because oftentimes, they like to be, the first one done. The smart person turns their test in first. The smart kid gets all their work done. And the last time I took a standardized test, I think I was the last person done. I passed it though. But it's we have to kind of break through that. So the nice thing about
this need to rush, right?
So here it's like, let's slow down. You don't need to be the first one done, but I think if we can...
how critical that is to so many other things, right? It really, so many things hinge on that.
And that's why I so talk a little bit about what else does it hinge to?
Well, besides this increased capacity to pay attention, and to be calm so that you can hear and construct responses better, it just helps a child feel like they can be more thoughtfully connected to their social world, is a big one. I would say. Achieving that balance where they can regulate their emotion and come from more thoughtful places in their school day.
And so I think that as I encourage educators and teachers, whatever, don't take that 15 or 20 minutes, because you'll gain it back. Because there'll be more learned. It's just like if you... And is there anything else as far as like with this connection with virtue education and mindsight that you would like to offer? Because I want to talk a little bit about the healthy mind platter. But I don't know, or maybe these two things kind of flow into one another. I
guess what I would add is that having it's an extraordinary thing what you're doing, and I'm so glad that you're passionate about it. But it's incorporating these things into our ordinary daily life, and that when you're in a school system where a child is doing this, day by day, year after year, you really get a picture of how much it becomes a part of their person and their personality.
Forms their character. It's a character formation, right?
It is. And then, when they do transition into adulthood, they really are more whole than if they had been in an environment where they weren't taking time to be calm and, look at this balance between vice and virtue.
Yeah. So as a parent, and also as a counselor, and I know that Dr. Dan Siegel talks about this in the Yes Brain. He talks about the healthy mind platter, and he may have taken that from somebody else, which I'm not sure. But why don't you, if you can remember them, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of throwing you a curveball.
I don't remember all of them, but I'll try.
But these would be some of the strategies, I think, which were important to create or to help this river of integration that's so important.
So he, again, back to that first skill development and balance. Dr. Siegel talks about how it's so important to have balance in daily life. And, kids can get stuck for hours playing video games, and we might let them because we're so busy trying to, run our lives, right? But he outlines this healthy mind platter that really is about things like focus time, time in, time to be connected somewhere in your day. So certainly a family meal or team activities at school. He talks about the importance of being physical and having exercise in your daily life. So it's important to, as a parent, intentionally balance these things rather than just be, rushing all the time with activity.
Right. So would you say there's the physical part, but there's also I don't know, maybe I've you talk about the word play, playtime.
Yes,
there's
that's one too.
That's
right?
what there's something about going and building a fort in the woods. That would definitely be using your executive skills, how will this tree help me build, which is a little bit different than maybe doing organized sport where you're doing. I don't know. I mean, it would be a little bit. I think they're both extremely important.
Where you can be creative, and that curiosity about being in nature then translates to curiosity about ideas and learning in the classroom. So that kind of playful exploration that isn't structured is very helpful and good for a child.
And I think, too, it'd be good, just it'd be downtime, but I think even if your kids are saying they're bored, that's probably okay, too.
It is. It's so important for children in this culture of immediate gratification that they learn how to be bored. That's part of the resilience piece, right? I can tolerate boredom. Back when you and I were growing up, if you said you were bored, you got a chore, right? So you really learned how to handle boredom. That you
you didn't say it because you knew you'd have another job to do.
Maybe I'll read a book, or maybe I'll go walking out in the woods. So learning how to handle boredom, learning how to handle unpleasantness. This idea that we develop diligence and we have time for pleasure, but we don't let that interfere with work. That, again, we have that balance between work and pleasure, and maybe even put pleasure on the other side of work.
So all of these things, are strategies to work towards this integration. And also, I think, even just to be able to I think it's good to encourage, teachers and parents that if you start to see this rigidity or this chaos in your son or your daughter, don't panic.
Right.
Don't do that because that's going to be, as you know now, it's going to impact the downstairs part of your brain.
And that it's just part of growing up, right? Our children don't come to us fully formed, and they are in formation, and they have these natural periods of regression. But when you see rigidity or chaos, you should stand back and, be curious about it yourself and wonder, what is my child struggling with internally that I could help them with through some of these tools from the Virtue program or tools from the Yes Brain or the whole brain child or Brainstorm even.
And then the connecting part of the healthy things to do. What I'd like for you to speak on as we kind of draw this to a conclusion, though. We were talking earlier about this isolation, and that young people can almost put themselves on an island,
Yes.
And I think in a conversation that you and I were just probably having privately, you said that this is something you see that's becoming more common among teens and young people. Is there anything that, with using this connection, or anything you could offer, advice maybe you could offer to parents or even to teachers, if they start to see a student by themselves at lunch or or moving away when they have time to work on a project, or on the playground or at home? How do you connect in a proper way to keep that, and what have you seen, and then a strategy to kind of counteract that?
Well, the conversation you and I had was something that I've been noticing a lot with high schoolers that I work with, and even in middle school, that there is this tendency, almost a movement, to disconnect kids from their parents and to make their peer group, really, really important. And it's absolutely important in their development that they, separate some from parents and attach to their peer group. But for whatever reason, and, we as parents seem to be going along with it, that they're connecting too much and too soon. Yeah. And then this peer group that's disconnected from the adult world is kind of developing their own set of rules that, aren't very virtuous, aren't about goodness. They're more about who has power and control and who's popular and that kind of thing. So kids can even be amongst their peer group and feel very, very alone. Yeah. And then they're conditioned to disconnect from the adult world and not have that as a resource. So it can cause lots of anxiety and overwhelming feelings of loneliness for them. And, I think this is contributing to our epidemic of suicide, where young people are seeing that they're so alone. Why even try to, build a life for myself ahead of me? Yeah. Oh, and it's very tragic.
Yeah, it is tragic and sad, and I think all these different healthy habits, or these different things that you can do to help the brain to be more integrated, which of course would be mind and heart, as they're doing, right. And the connectedness. And you mentioned earlier, just even like the family dinner. I think that would be a beautiful way if parents could kind of restore that opportunity where you can sit around and you talk at the meal, that can take them out of this peer group. Right. Daily,
right.
And to do that
in this comfortable way where everybody can feel free to talk about what's on their mind and their heart. But when you have this understanding of the rigidity and the chaos that's happening when a child isn't in the river of integration, you do have a way of tuning in and paying attention to those kinds of signals early on before it becomes a full-blown problem that requires intervention and a diagnosis and treatment and that kind of thing. So you can turn up the volume to yourself to be more intentional. When a child is rigid, really, or chaotic, they're really trying to manage some emotion or relational issue that they're having. And when you know that there's a mind behind the rigidity or the chaos, you can tune in with that mind and figure that out together. So here's where you're bringing that sense of we, like any problem that shows up, we are approaching it together. That's very comforting to a child. You can, connect to that problem but behind the rigidity or the chaos and redirect. And that's really the action of parenting. That's the parenting work itself.
And then I think that's true when you think about that behind that is the mind, and that even just how you order the words to say, you may say, I am mad, or I am angry, or I am sad, but to understand that those are feelings, and you could say, I feel sad because, and then you continue.
Right.
Why are you feeling, this way, expressing of the emotions? Yeah.
And when parents do that kind of thing, they put a language to what's behind that rigidity or that chaos. They really need to understand they're doing about 80% of the work. Because they've just moved it into the upstairs brain and that, cortical connected place that's about problem solving and learning to regulate. So having this language that you have developed in the Virtue program is so important for a child to make that transition from my body feels sad to I can think about why I'm sad and I can reflect on that and I can connect to help soothe that and solve it.
Bring to it. And that's why when you mentioned the Lectio Divina, the Life of Christ, I put lines in there and there's pages to write and hopefully to get them to encourage to write in cursive or to write because that, again, there is moving that, as you said, to the other part of the brain.
A downstairs reactive experience to one that I can reflect on. And the pains of life, the futilities of life are so much more tolerable then when we can think about them and see them from a distance and seek out soothing or seek out problem solving.
And to move towards that happiness, really, when we talk about happiness is living a virtuous life, happiness is living a yes brain,
Yes, it absolutely is.
Happiness is becoming the person God's created us to be, so that we can be, we can move towards this human flourishing.
And what parent doesn't want that for their child, right?
That's exactly what they want, and that's what you would want as a counselor, anyone who's the scientists and the people that have studied this, that are bringing this to our attention and helping us and really giving us the tool. But even what you said earlier, which is so beautiful, is that that we see that God is showing this, through the science
it to us,
and that, oftentimes you wonder, is God, hearing, and you think about the Israelites in the desert, it was better back in Egypt when we could eat that, and they were out here in the desert, then God started feeding them manna, and then they began to complain about that. But here, with the suffering that many people are experiencing because of the mental illness and the sadness, that we can see, we can see through the eyes of faith that through this science, because faith and reason come together, that God is truly hearing the cries of people, and He's interceding and showing this to us. And
I think just this, when the science was evolving to just see ourselves as stuck and static entities, it's actually been making us sicker and less happy. And I think you can just look in culture and look around to see that that's the truth of it. And I think this was His grace to reveal this to us, that we can transform ourselves by using our minds to look in on our own minds and to, reestablish the importance of relationship and connection.
Well, Karen, I can't thank you enough for giving your time and being brave enough to be sitting here. And God has given you really just so many special gifts and talents, and to be able to share that and to really bring this work and what we're trying to do as far as education, the virtue education, bringing these worlds together in a beautiful way, and really most importantly, to help parents, to help educators to study this and to begin to see, okay, because I'm sure oftentimes a parent are like, help me. What do I do next? You don't.
There's so much information.
You don't get a book with each child. You know,
it's so true.
You learn that on your knees, right? I learned how to be a principal on my knees. As your teachers learn how to be teachers on your knees.
It's good to get on our knees and to be reflective. And you are doing an amazing good work, and I appreciate your yes. To hearing about this interpersonal neurobiology and incorporating it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And for those people that are joining us for this last episode, this is not going to be, we will continue on further ones, but I encourage you to go back to the last two episodes where Karen and I began our discussion, understanding this and unpacking this beautiful revelation in a certain sense that's come to us through science as God shows us a path to wholeness, to holiness, and to happiness. And to know that truly, happiness is living a virtuous life. Happiness is living with a yes brain. So thank you for joining in this episode of Mind and Heart. If you like this episode of the Mind and Heart podcast, I invite you to click on the next available podcast and continue to enrich your mind, heart, and soul.